Welcome back to another edition of Wild Dogs and Hogs. I'm Mike Waddell, along with the coach Jimmy Collins. And Jimmy, we have both forgotten to shave this week. But I think we look pretty good with this rugged exterior.
Well, you were in the mountains last weekend, so you have to have the rugged exterior for the mountains. Obviously, you're a mountaineer when you get into that atmosphere. And my only excuse is that I'm old and I've got a lot of sun damage and I'm trying to treat it right now. So yeah, we look good though. Look good unshaven, without a doubt.
You're right. I was able to go up to the mountain to the Appalachian State East Carolina game along with our old North State tailgate, Dave Glenn and myself up there to see the Mountaineers' big win. But earlier in the week, I had a chance to go to the Appalachian State football coaches campfire and got to share in the presence of one of the great coaching legends of North Carolina, Jerry Moore.
Well, obviously, Coach Moore had such a great run at App State, and all the things that he accomplished in the championships, and the number of players that he put out into different leagues, and just such a tremendous job. You know, I go all the way back to 1989. That we played when we were at Duke with Coach Spurrier. We played a Jerry Moore coach team, Texas Tech, in the All-American Bowl in Birmingham, Alabama at that time. So I've known about Jerry Moore for a long, long time. But to answer your question and put it in perspective, I'm an old vet in this game too, so I may have a different outlook than some of these young guys. I think the old guys that have been through all the things that have happened in this business, I think we have a great perspective on where the game is and where the game is going to go. So for the young guys to say that they don't want to hear what we have to say, maybe sometimes they should listen a little bit.
Well, somebody was listening this past week up on the mountain because Appalachian State came out after that double overtime loss to North Carolina in week 2, and their week 3 opponent came all the way from Greenville after being close in the first 2 quarters. It was really all Appalachian State down the stretch, pulling away with the win. Appalachian now 2-1. They'll head to Wyoming this week, but East Carolina right now, and Mike Houston, the guy who has had a lot of success. Jimmy, the Pirates are in trouble right now. They're 0-3. And what do you feel like if you're a member of that coaching staff?
Well, you feel a lot of pressure. Number one. Number two is you feel the need that you have to go win this week, so they do feel the heat a little bit and the anxiety of what they need to do. So it's not a good feeling. 0-3 is not good at any time. Obviously we all get a little bit of the tightness involved when you get to that point, and the need to win is huge.
North Carolina gets the win over Big Ten foe Minnesota at Kenan Stadium. Not really a very close game, but the North Carolina air attack starting to become alive right now with a new face joining the Tar Heel receiving corps.
As you will recall, I've talked about Nate McCollum since the beginning, since our first show, and just kept waiting for him to emerge as the number one target for Drake May. Obviously, I don't know how many times he was targeted, but I know he caught 15. 15 now, let me repeat that. He caught 15 balls on Saturday, and he became that deep threat, the deep threat that they've been looking for. I think they completed 10.9 yards per completion in the game. Vertical throws were once again involved. I think the only negative about the North Carolina offense is that they didn't run it quite as well as they had in weeks past, but a great performance with almost 500 yards of offense, and Drake having just an excellent day.
North Carolina with the win, Appalachian State with the win. Duke and Wake Forest also hold serve in their games. Duke now getting ready for a big game coming up this week against UConn, but you can't take for granted these wins that the Blue Devils are stacking up, and Wake Forest just keeps doing Wake Forest things and getting wins, though they did have a close call on the road in Norfolk against the Old Dominion Monarchs.
Well, what a great comeback by the Wake Forest offense, and the way they executed in the second half. They were down by 17 and came back and with a big win. So you got to give Coach Clausen and his staff a great deal of credit. Just a wonderful job on the road. And let's be honest now. When you start moving from Power Five conferences and you start going to non-Power Five teams and playing them in their place, no matter how hard you coach and you talk to players and say this will be a close game, we will be challenged in this game, this will be their bowl game, et cetera, whatever words you want to use when you speak with your players. Well, sometimes they don't listen. They have to have a wake-up call, and Wake Forest got the wake-up call and obviously came back and won the game on the road. Big win for those guys.
North Carolina State also gets back into the win column. Not a very challenging game against VMI, but
are we even going to talk about playing VMI? Come on now.
But Dave Doran's Wolfpack needed to get some confidence, I think, back in their system after that tough loss to Notre Dame, because they have some very big games coming up here in the short future.
That's exactly what I was going to say, and I was just trying to be a little bit of a jerk at that point in time. But the Wolfpack needed a game like that. They needed to get their feet on the ground. They needed a win. They needed their offense to have some success as they move into the difficult part of their schedule. I think the negative coming out of that game is that if I saw this correctly, that Peyton Wilson has a possibility of being on the injury report right now.
That is not a good thing for the Wolfpack, because Wilson out of Hillsborough Orange is really one of the standouts in all of the ACC as a linebacker. He'll need to get healthy for Dave Doran and that Wolfpack defense. Is some big games coming up for the Wolfpack in the next few weeks. Let's talk about one of our great sponsors right here on Wild Dogs and Hogs. That's the Original Salt Works. They've been serving the Wilmington area for over 50 years. Owner Bob Hubbard and his staff create a welcome atmosphere to go along with their home-cooked breakfast and lunch that simply cannot be rivaled anywhere in North Carolina. Jimmy, they got pancakes, they've got eggs, waffles, hot dogs, crab cakes, and the best grits in the state. It's the Original Salt Works, a proud partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Jimmy, have you ever been over to the Original Salt Works?
I have been to the Original Salt Works, and you and I actually had lunch at the Original Salt Works. Wonderful place, and I love breakfast. My only problem is my wife does not love to go out to breakfast, but we are going to the Original Salt Works very, very soon for breakfast.
It's awesome. They also have a great lunch. The first time I ever went there with Dave Glenn, Bob Hubbard was not around, but I said, I want to try everything. So we had a late breakfast, and then we had an early lunch. And I love their hot dogs. I like the hot dogs with everything on them, that North Carolina style with the chili and the slaw and the mustard and the onions. Really good stuff. But the Original Salt Works, one of the great partners that we have here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Jimmy, let's talk a little bit about those two teams that played in the Mountains last week. Again, East Carolina now 0-3. And Appalachian State 2-1. They get the week 1 win over Gardner-Webb, losing that double overtime thriller to North Carolina, then the win over the Pirates. They now have to get on a plane. I was talking with Sean Clark earlier this week, and he's saying, Mike, we got to go to Wyoming.
Mike, I hope for App's sake that Wyoming is paying really, really well for them to come out there. That's a shocking matchup for me to picture, and there's so many games that possibilities here on our coast. It's again, I say why would an athletic director schedule that game? I have to ask this question: is Wyoming coming to the Mountain at some point? Is this a 2-for-1 deal? Why do you make this deal? I have a huge question on this one in my mind.
Another one that you would question right now would have to be what the Charlotte 49ers are in the middle of. They played the big NBC Saturday night game against the Big Ten's Maryland Terrapins a few weeks ago, get the loss. Then they dropped one to Georgia State this past weekend. And now They have to go to your former residence, the Swamp, Steve Spurrier Field. And all of a sudden, Florida, where they were pushing the panic button a few weeks ago after the big win over Tennessee, now Billy Napier's feeling pretty good about himself.
Many years ago, Steve Spurrier spoiled the fans in the Swamp and in Gainesville, Florida, and the Gator fans. So they expect to win, and they expect to compete for the SEC championship and the national championship. Not every other year, but every single year. So let me say this. If I'm not mistaken, the Gators will be down 4 starters because of a post game or late in the game fight or altercation with Tennessee. And I have to ask this question, Mike. I've been thinking about this all day and all week. It's 26. I think it's 26-13, Florida. And Florida is going to take a knee to take the game and end the game. Why does the head football coach at Tennessee call a timeout? Please explain that to me. So as a result, there are 4 Gators and two volunteers that are suspended for the first half of games this week. I can't understand why you call timeout. Let them take a knee. Let them end the game. You've lost. You don't have a chance to get the ball back at that point in time.
Well, coaches are known to do some crazy things, just like players from time to time. And one of the things that I was watching this past weekend was after the Charlotte 49er loss. Now, Charlotte is the newest FBS program here in North Carolina. They have a brand new head coach in Bip Poggi, who came to be a head coach in a very unique way, and he's not going quietly into defeat. I mean, he basically called out. He said, hey, if we can't get it straightened up, if I have to get rid of players, if I have to get rid of coaches, if I have to get rid of myself, I can't live like this. It seems a little early in your first season as a head coach to be talking with such doomsday gloom panic.
They're 3 games in to the first year. They weren't very good a year ago. I don't know why you think, unless you were so active in the transfer portal and you signed great players in the transfer portal, that you transform your roster like Colorado has done at this point in time. And by the way, they go to Oregon this week to play, so that'll be an interesting matchup. But I think Coach Poggi may be a little bit. I don't want to say panicked at this point in time, but he is 0-3. Is he 1-2 or 0-3?
I think he's 1-2 right now.
1-2. He's 1-2 right now. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes with this. But I think he's a little bit off at this point in time, 3 weeks into his initial season into that program.
But he's certainly a character. One thing about Bip Poggi, he's bringing out his pregame stogie. He wears a sleeveless T-shirt or sweatshirt out on the field right now.
He needs to cover up more than he needs to expose.
That's probably a good point. That's Jimmy Collins. I'm Mike Waddell, and this is Wild Dogs and Hogs on the North Carolina Sports Network. Our foundational partner is the North Carolina Pork Council, and the North Carolina pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. The pork industry contributes more than $10 billion a year to North Carolina's economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs, primarily in small rural communities across eastern North Carolina. Learn more about the pork industry at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner for the North Carolina Sports Network. Jimmy, in a few minutes, we're going to be joined here on Wild Dogs and Hogs by a Greensboro Grimsley Worley, not only past, but also present. He's their athletic director now. Back in the day, he was a heck of an offensive standout for the Worleys back in the late 1980s. Of course, we're talking about the red snapper, Ethan Albright. What do you remember about Big Ethan?
Well, most of all, I have 2 experiences with Ethan. Number one is I was coaching at Duke University, and his brother, Stuart Albright, was on our team. The other interesting thing about my relationship with the Albright family is that my late wife, Jerry, we actually did our pre-labor stuff with Ethan and Stuart's mother. And I can't remember what that's called right now. So it's been so long ago. Lamaze. We actually did Lamaze with Ethan's. Yes, yeah, well, all the breathing and all that stuff. So I have a long relationship with the Albright family. Number one is he told me no and ended up going to the University of North Carolina. And we had an interesting talk about that earlier this week, and I'll let him tell that story. But many years later, we ended up being on the same team, and I'm going to use who we were at that time, the Washington Redskins. And Ethan Albright was the best long snapper that I've ever been associated with. We made in the NFL, we made a 15-yard long snap, which it's all changed a little bit in college football. Pro football is still the same. But he made it in less than zero point 0.7 seconds per snap. Unbelievable. We could turn somebody loose in the A gap and they could not get there to block a punt. He was tremendous. 17 years he did that.
An amazing stretch of 230 consecutive games started. So we'll talk to big Ethan Albright when we come back here on Wild Dogs and Hogs after this timeout, as you're tuned in to the North Carolina Sports Network.
I wasn't born a leader.
It wasn't given to me.
I couldn't buy it.
How'd I get here?
I decided.
I decided.
I decided.
I decided.
Decide to lead as an Army officer.
Wild Dogs and Hogs rolls on here in week 4 of the college football season. Mike Waddell, the coach, Jimmy Collins, now joined by our Sport Clips MVP of the week. We're talking, of course, about the former Greensboro Grimsley Whirly, North Carolina Tar Heel, and many different teams in the NFL, most notably the Washington Redskins, where he and Coach Collins were teammates for a while. We're talking about Ethan Albright. And Ethan, I have to ask you, you've come full circle in your football career. You were a standout player for the Whirlies back in the late 1980s, and now you're back as the Whirlies AD. So before we go back to the Wayback Machine, let's talk about what's going on right now with Grimsley football, because you guys are looking pretty good, undefeated right now, and atop the RPI in the latest NCHSAA rankings.
Well, our football coach, Daryl Brown, just does a fantastic job with the kids. He creates really healthy relationships, and the kids talk about it all over Greensboro. The kids want to play for him. His grandfather was at Southern Guilford. The stadium's named after his grandfather, so he comes from a lifetime of high school coaching, and he does it the right way. There's a lot of people out there. I listen. They're just cussing kids out all over the place. And, 20, 30 years ago, everybody coached that way. You could, because there was nothing else to do. Now I watch coaches do that, and then they wonder why their players transfer out. There's so many options now to go play year-round lacrosse, basketball, baseball. Everybody's got pressure to play year-round. If the kids aren't having fun in high school, we're doing something wrong. Like, there's ways to push, and Coach Brown pushes as hard as anybody. But those kids, my two sons got to play for him, and they loved practice. I never loved practice. I did practice. I was active in practice, but I would never say I loved practice. But the kids here, they just really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Keeping it fun is always one of the keys, obviously, at every level of football, and you've been successful at every level. But going back to your time as a Whirly, you were under a lot of pressure to go follow your brother Stuart to play at Duke, where I think Jim Collins might have been trying to recruit you. Of course, we were trying to recruit you at Guilford. We didn't get very strong reception from you to come and play for the Quakers, which was a great disappointment to all of us. But you end up going to North Carolina. Tell me about that recruiting story and how Coach Collins came into your life in that way.
Well, it's one of those things. Obviously, with my dad playing basketball at Duke, I had one brother played baseball at Duke, another brother played football at Duke. When I came along, it was one of those things where I was everybody's younger brother. And I was never embarrassed by my family ever. But I got to a point where I kind of wanted to be Ethan. When my time came for recruiting, I was being recruited as a pass-catching tight end. So obviously, Coach Spurrier and the offense that he ran was very attractive. to be a part of it. There was a lot of rumors that he was leaving to go to Florida. So I figured, well, why not take a trip to Florida? And Galen Hall was there, and there were some coaches there that were great. They were very good to me. But all the alumni that were in the area was, hey, Spurrier's coming. Everybody was already talking about Spurrier coming to Florida. So in my mind, I left on signing day, and I told my parents, I'm going to sign with Florida. And I went into high school and sat down with Coach Smouse, my high school coach. He said, Coach, I'm going to Florida. And he said, well, let's just talk about it. He said, what you don't know is your mom called me. She's not going to let you go to Florida. if you want to stay in the Albright house, we need to find a better solution. So I actually sat in his office for 2 hours drawing up pluses and minuses for the schools that I was looking at. And everything came up Florida, except for one category. He said, Ethan, and this made a lot of sense to me, where are you going to live after you're done playing football? I was like, well, I live in Greensboro. He said, well, Ethan, do you know that? I'm like, oh, yeah, I went for college. I'd never leave Greensboro. I know. I just had that in my heart, in the back of my mind, that when it's all said and done, I was going to be living at home with my brothers, my family, just kind of like we had grown up. He said, well, it makes a lot of sense to go to State University in the network of after you're done playing. And part of that, too, was I wanted to be Ethan. Like I was under the shadow. Hey, I was John's younger brother, Eric's younger brother. Here's Stewart's younger brother, Doug Albright's younger brother, younger son. And I was never embarrassed by any of it. But you get to a point where I think I wanted to show my family that I could stand on my own 2 feet as the youngest and still make things work.
Now, are you the biggest and toughest of all the Albrights? Because if you're not, I can imagine that those Carolina-Duke games are pretty contentious.
It was interesting growing up. It was a physical family. Everything was a physical confrontation until I got big as everybody else. I grew up when I was in high school. I mean, I graduated, I was 210 pounds. I was not a big guy by any means, but apparently I found the freshman 20 every year of college.
Great answer.
Once I could take care of myself, my brothers, they didn't want it to be a physical confrontation all the time.
Ethan Albright with us here on Wild Dogs and Hogs. Mike Waddell along with Coach Jim Collins. And Ethan, you go to North Carolina as that pass-catching tight end for Matt Brown very early in his first tenure as a North Carolina head coach. But then you move to offensive tackle. Who had that conversation with you, and how did they convince you to do that?
Well, it was one of those things you can kind of see the handwriting on the wall sometimes. I got to Carolina, and, I was 210 pounds, and they were struggling in 1-10. Other guys got hurt. All of a sudden, I had to play. Well, I as a freshman, physically, I wasn't ready to play at that point, and I took some lumps. I had multiple concussions. I got knocked out. I was the going joke that, hey, he's going out for a pass. He's going to get knocked out. So it just was one of those things where developmental-wise, I broke a finger, so I was in a cast for half a season. It's hard to catch a ball in a cast. However, I did still snap for extra points with a big cast on my hand. I could still snap with it, but it was hard to get downfield and catch. And they recruited a kid named Greg DeLong that played 8 or 9 years in the NFL. Deems May was a tight end that I was competing with. He played 7 or 8 years in the NFL. They had a number of guys that came in that were really good. And so instead of this day and age, I'd have probably been pushed to the portal and told, hey, if you want to play, you got to go to the portal and find somewhere else. But they let me redshirt and presented an opportunity as an offensive lineman. I tried to make the best of it. Size-wise, I probably wasn't what I needed to be, but I was trying hard to put weight on and be a lineman. I wound up being an all-conference tackle my senior year. I never set out to be a long snapper, which is where my career took me. I always thought I was going to be a tight end or an offensive lineman. And one of Coach Collins's, one of your colleagues gave me the shot of a lifetime in Miami as an undrafted rookie free agent. Rich McGeorge had a big say in me going down there. And I think very highly, very kindly of him all the time. But I'm just one of those guys. Y'all are very nice to have me on the show, but I'm just one of those guys that feels like I let some people down along the way because I didn't make it as a tight end. I didn't make it as a tackle, but I found my niche as a long snapper.
I mean, other than being the third string quarterback, I mean, I always wanted my son to be a long snapper. I sent him to the kicking camps and just basically pushed him in there and said, just go volunteer to snap, get reps in. I mean, he's 6'4", 240. I mean, he would have been a really good long snapper, but he just didn't have the love for it.
One thing that really helped me was being an offensive lineman. I was able to probably, I would say I'm the NFL record holder for most scout team reps. I was a center guard and tackle during practice for 10 years. I gave center a break, gave the guard a break, gave the tackles a break, and did all the practice reps. But I was no threat to ever take their position as a starting lineman, so they loved it. So when teams would draft long snappers and bring other guys in, the linemen would kind of protect me because they knew I was going to give them a break during practice. And I could have been I was an emergency lineman on game day. I was the 9th lineman. If guys would have got hurt, I could have gone in and got a few plays done until they got taped up and got back in there. But that scenario never happened.
Let me say this, Mike. Ethan played in a time in the NFL where the long snapper, whether it be extra points, whether it be punts, whatever, the long snapper was not protected like he is today. Ethan was under attack every time he put his head between his legs and snapped the football. You need to tell the story now about your back being broken with us in 2002.
Oh, that was one of the things that ultimately caused the end of my career. Was we were playing against the Cowboys. It was the last game of the season, and Leroy Glover had this judo chop. While my head was between my legs, I was looking back. He was lined up right on me, and he judo chopped me and fractured 2 of the little transverse processes that come off my back. And at the time, I had a streak but I did finish the game.
Your time with the Redskins in the NFL, with all of the teams that you played with, truly remarkable. NFL records. You have meme status in the Madden game. We won't go into that. But I want to ask you, because Jimmy and I had a chance to be teammates in the Alliance of American Football with the Orlando Apollos, and I got a chance to be around Steve Spurrier. And growing up a Carolina fan, I didn't like Steve Spurrier. I didn't like him at all. He was the Duke head coach. And when I got the job as the president of the Orlando Apollos, I said, I got to work with Steve Spurrier. Ethan, I got to tell you, Jimmy's heard me say this 100 times. He's the greatest football coach I've ever been around because the guy is a true ball coach. I mean, he's not a CEO. He's not about how he looks or anything else. He just says exactly what's on his mind, and he's the smartest guy I've ever been in the room with.
Well, I think in Washington, when I look back at what's gone on lately, I didn't know all the front office stuff that was going on. Mr. Snyder has made a lot of headlines for doing a lot of different things, but what we saw was Marty Schottenheimer brought me in, and he was a ground and pounded coach. So he put the whole salary cap in the ground and pound linemen and running backs and that kind of thing. And then Mr. Snyder brings in Coach Spurrier. Well, he's going to gun and fun, and we're going to throw it, Coach. By the time that we get the roster turned over probably to what he was hoping for it to be, we're leading the league in dead salary cap money every year. So we're kind of hamstrung on some of the things that I'm sure Coach Spurrier wanted to do that we couldn't with that. And then, when Spurrier leaves, you go to Joe Gibbs, he's going to run the ball. So then I'm in a situation where they're turning the roster over again to go back to a running team. And it was that kind of struggle. It just seemed like Coach Spurrier and the front office couldn't get on the same page fast enough to put the roster where he wanted it to be.
Well, you know what, Ethan? We had the conflict, as you remember, between potential general managers, and I will not name names at this point in time, but we had 2 guys that were trying to make decisions, and they didn't like each other. And then you threw in the owner trying to make a decision, or not trying, making decisions. So guess what? We as coaches didn't make a whole lot of decisions on the roster.
Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't in those front office meetings, because I know we had Marvin Lewis the first year as a defensive coordinator, and he wanted all the money on defense. And I'm sure Coach Spurrier struggled with who they were going to bring in. And then Marvin leaves, and George Edwards was a former Duke player that's been around the NFL for a long time. But at that time, I think it was his first defensive coordinator job.
It was.
So he got a young guy in, and all of a sudden, all the big-name defensive guys disappeared. But then we got everybody on offense, and it just seemed like kind of a power struggle all the time between people instead of everybody working together to see that vision. But what Mike did was he reached out to Buffalo Bills, and said, "Hey, I got a guy worth looking at," because they were looking for a long snapper. And he gave me a very good recommendation. And Bruce DeHaven took a chance on me in Buffalo, coming from Miami, a longtime special teams coach up there. And that worked out great for a while. And then Washington lost a playoff game at Tampa on a bad snap. Then they were looking for a new long snapper. And Mike Stock brought me down to Washington. And I was with Mike Stock for a long time. And when he left, Danny Smith came in. And God, Danny could have replaced me at any time that he wanted to with a younger player.
So one of the things about being in the NFL and playing for different teams is, I mean, you amass a lot of stuff, I would think. Miami, Green Bay, Miami again, Buffalo, Washington, San Diego. How much stuff do you amass over the years, or when you leave a team, do you just leave it all behind in your locker?
I got gear. I got swag gear from all those places, and I pass it out to my parents, my brothers. They all like to collect all that. I've got a helmet from each team that I've played for, kind of like your bookshelves behind you. I've got a helmet, and I've got some game footballs that mean a lot to me. They're those little markers from doing something significant within our game plan, and to get, presented a game ball in front of the team. That's a big deal in the NFL to me. Those game balls are special.
They are.
Well, you'll be giving out some game balls as the athletics director at Greensboro Grimsley High School. The Whirlies playing there in Jamison Stadium, the place that every North Carolina high school kid wants to go play in that East-West All-Star game. What are the biggest challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis as the director of athletics at the high school level?
Right, is financially. It's really tough. Grimsley, we've got a huge alumni base, and we've got a big booster club, and they help tremendously. But the cost of officials is up. They all got a raise last year. They 10% across the board. Security costs are up. It's $45 an hour for a police officer. At football games, we have 8 or 9 police officers. At normal games, Coach Collins, that Page game, we're going to have 20 to 24 officers.
Exactly. Yeah.
And transportation costs are up, and ticket prices have stayed the same. So when expenses are up and revenue is the same, obviously it's hard to make things work that way. Most of the sports, I think, is kind of a small college. The soccer loses money, volleyball loses money, field hockey loses money, football pays the bill for everybody. So that's trying to make that work and still get our coaches the equipment that they need and still maintain the tractors to mow the grass and fertilize and that kind of stuff is a bit of a challenge. But again, at Grimsley, I'm very, very lucky because we've got some good corporate sponsors and we've got some people that really care about the school that help us. But it's kind of like the NFL revenue sharing thing. If one team's really way far out in front of everybody else, it's not a competitive balance, and it's not a good game day if all the schools in Guilford County don't have a certain amount where they can all go out and compete and have the tools that they need to do it.
Ethan, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule as the Grimsley High School AD and the father of 4 and the husband to your wife, Catherine, to join us here on Wild Dogs and Hogs. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully at a Whirly game or maybe at a Carolina game as the Tar Heels are off to a great start. And I know that makes you happy as an alum.
It does. I'm proud of them. The guys, Mac Brown's put a ton of energy and effort into the program down there. And I love going down there because people remember me in a positive way down there. They treat me special, and it's fun to get down there. But, the one son at Northwestern and the one's at Cornell, if I'm going to a game, I'm going to watch them for the next couple of years. And, I look forward to getting to Carolina when they're done playing.
That's awesome. Ethan Albright with us right here as our Sport Clips MVP of the week on Wild Dogs and Hogs.
It's your time to make a greater impact. U.S. Army Reserve.
Lawson Insurance is a family-operated agency known for its commitment to community and dedication to ensuring that people and businesses in Raleigh are prepared for life's challenges. They'll work with you to be certain that you have the right coverage to meet your needs so you can continue to thrive and achieve your goals when it matters most. High Street Insurance Partners is a growing national insurance agency all across the continental United States. They're the personal and business insurance experts within your community. Lawson Insurance Group's Local expertise combined with High Street's extensive resources means more choice and support for you, our client, together. We're working to create stronger, more resilient communities. It's Lawson Insurance and the High Street Insurance Partners, a proud supporter of the North Carolina Sports Network. Sport Clips is like no other place you've ever gotten your hair cut. Sports everywhere, TVs everywhere, playing sports, and guy smart stylists who know how to give you the haircut you want and the haircut you need. You don't ever need an appointment at Sport Clips. Walk-ins are welcome, and you'll walk out feeling like an MVP. Guaranteed. Be sure and ask about the MVP experience, as it's something you just can't put into words. It's awesome. A haircut, hot steam towel, invigorating shampoo, neck and shoulder treatment. It takes a haircut and turns it into an event. Sport Clips, an official partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. Coach Jim Collins and me, Mike Waddell, with you here on Wild Dogs and Hogs, the weekly college football show here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Our Old North State tailgate and traveling sports circus will be on the road this week, Coach, and we're going the high school route. A little Friday night lights in Andy's hometown for the Mount Airy Starmount game. Mount Airy could be the top team in all of high school football, and they're only a 1A school, and that really does have a Hoosiers type of feel to it when a 1A school can get that type of action going, and right now Mount Airy is looking good.
Mount Airy has a tremendous tradition through the years, without a doubt. Been a lot of really good players come out of that program, and the transition through many coaches that have been very, very successful there. So I envy you going to the Mount Airy Starmount game. That's a pretty good rivalry.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's go now to our Excel Moving and Storage Big Four games of the week, Coach. Gardner-Webb and East Carolina down at Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium. Trey Lamb and the Running Bulldogs have had a tough go of it of late, but they have to be licking their collective chops at an 0-3 East Carolina ball club. Do you see a chance, a pathway for maybe Gardner-Webb to go down there and get the win in Greenville?
I would be shocked if that happened, to be honest with you. East Carolina is a Mike Houston has a great tradition that at East Carolina, and for him to start the season 0-3 is hard enough. But I would be shocked for them to struggle against a Gardner-Webb team. Don't get me wrong. Now I think Trey Lamb does a heck of a job, but for them to go to Greenville and win will be quite a task.
Our next game up, Georgia Tech coming up from Atlanta up I-85. They will whirl into Wake Forest. And this could be a trap game for Dave Clawson and the Demon Deacons. Georgia Tech has a tendency to get people to play down to their level. It happened last year with the win over North Carolina. Do you see that possibly being a trip up for the Demon Deacons?
Well, it's an interesting matchup in itself, in that Wake has struggled at times. This year, they're off to a good start. Don't get me wrong; they're 3-0 with wins, but it's not your typical Wake Forest offense with the pass and tremendous comeback last week. It's a 4-point game. Wake is a 4-point favorite at home, so that means the people in Vegas think it's basically an even game at this point in time. So it would not shock me to see Georgia Tech come in and play quite well there.
We talked earlier about Charlotte, the 49ers going down to the Swamp in Gainesville to face the Florida Gators. I don't think we have to talk about this one a long time. I think it'll be an early night at Visors over there, Coach Spurrier's rooftop bar.
I would say this, for Billy Napier's sake, he's on a real high at this point in time after a big win over the Tennessee Vols last week. For a non-Power 5 team to come into the Swamp, they better play quite well, or what he's experiencing this week will reverse next week. So I expect the Gators to play well.
We talk about trap games a lot, Coach, on the air, off the air. North Carolina going to Pittsburgh, that's a tough game because the
this
one
one
thing
scares me.
The one thing you can guarantee, and I worked with Pat Narduzzi. We were together at the University of Cincinnati back in 2006. He's one of the coaches that I truly adore. I mean, he's just a great guy, fun to hang out with, and he's fun to play for. His kids play for him. If the Tar Heels aren't really prepared and have their heads screwed on straight, Pitt could end this little stretch run that Carolina has put together to start this 2023 season. They got to be prepared.
You know, Mike, we as you go back to the last time the Tar Heels were there, I was on that staff at that point in time in 2021, and we lost a close game in overtime there that year. Obviously, that was Sam Howell's senior year, or his year his last year at North Carolina before he went out. But we lost an overtime game there, so it can be quite difficult to play at Pitt. It will not be a packed house, if I remember correctly about playing there. But the Pitt students are enthusiastic, and it'll be a tough challenge. Pitt's a very physical football team. At least they have been in the years that I played against them at both North Carolina and at Duke. They always had a physical quality about them that made it tough on you. So it would not surprise me for it to be a very close game.
Pitt's been mercurial so far this year. They lost a couple weeks ago to Cincinnati, and then the Bearcats turn around and lose for the first time in 16 years to their Victory Bell rival, Miami of Ohio. So you just don't know which Pitt is going to show up. North Carolina has to be buttoned up. But I do want to, before we get out of here, I do want to go back to a guy you just mentioned, Sam Howell. He's off to a great start as the starting quarterback for the Washington Commanders. And he's had some rough patches in these games, but he is a gritty performer. Sam Howell is one of those guys you just want to root for.
No doubt, Sam, and as we go back and we look at the Union County and the Mecklenburg County guys that are having quite a lot of success in the NFL right now, you have to look at Sam and what Sam's done for the Commanders. That's hard for me to say at this point in time. And then you have to look at the comeback that Daniel Jones was part of against the Arizona Cardinals on Sunday also. So a lot of good things. And I must add, Sam Howell has Jamison Crowder out of Monroe High School and former Duke Blue Devil and multiple years in the NFL. That's one of his receivers for the Commanders. So, a lot of good things going on for two former quarterbacks out of the ACC and out of North Carolina.
Wild Dogs and Hogs is an exclusive presentation of the North Carolina Sports Network. Foundational partner is the North Carolina Pork Council. Thanks again to our special guest tonight, former Tar Heel, Whirly, and Pro Bowl player Ethan Albright. For Coach Jim Collins, I'm Mike Waddell. We'll see you next week right here on the North Carolina Sports Network and Wild Dogs and Hogs.